What would you do if your own daughter looked you dead in the eye in front of people you barely knew and told you that you were an embarrassment? Not in a joking, lighthearted way, but in that sharp, deliberate tone meant to slice through skin and straight into bone. The kind of tone that leaves you stunned for a second too long because you're trying to decide whether you actually heard her right or whether your own child just wanted to humiliate you. It happened at her bridal shower, a garden venue, all white tablecloths and pastel flowers with 200 guests mingling like they'd wandered into a magazine spread. The air smelled of champagne and sugared strawberries, soft music clinking glasses, laughter rising in polite waves. And there she was, my only daughter, standing at the center of it all, the golden one, the one I had worked my hands raw to raise. She wore cream silk and an expensive smile, the kind that looked rehearsed for cameras. And then she looked at me, not with gratitude, not with warmth, but with that sly flicker in her eyes that I'd seen before, the one that always preceded a comment meant to put me in my place. "Mom," she said loudly enough for the nearby tables to turn their heads, "could you maybe not tell any of your stories today? You know how you get. It's kind of embarrassing." It was like a needle slipped beneath my skin. The air in my lungs stalled. My mouth stayed still, though a dozen retorts lined up fighting to escape. The guests chuckled awkwardly, thinking it was playful banter. But if you've ever been publicly diminished by someone you love, you know that wasn't banter. That was a warning, a reminder of the new hierarchy. You start thinking back, don't you? About all the times you swallowed your own pride so they could keep theirs? About the teenage years when she slammed doors and you told yourself it was just a phase? About the mornings you woke early to iron her school skirt so she'd look perfect even though she never thanked you? About the days you were invisible except when she needed something? And now here she was, the bride-to-be, center of admiration, and you, the background character she didn't want stealing even a fragment of her spotlight. I laughed softly, the kind of laugh people use when they're pretending not to be hurt. But inside, something shifted. Have you felt that before, that click? That sudden cold clarity when you realize this person doesn't see you as an equal, but as an accessory, one that can be hidden when it doesn't fit the aesthetic. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of polite conversation and clinking flutes. I moved like a ghost among the crowd, smiling in all the right places, my mind replaying her words over and over. She said I was embarrassing, as if decades of sacrifice could be reduced to a liability, as if I was some old relic she'd rather keep locked away. But there's something dangerous about a woman who's been underestimated for too long. Something quiet, patient, calculating. You stop trying to be understood and you start planning. 2 weeks later came the wedding reception. Same guests, same polished smiles, but with more wine, more noise, more eyes watching. And that's when my plan began to unfold. You might think revenge should be loud, messy, a scene, but no, the best kind is subtle, elegant, surgical. The kind that leaves them smiling until they realize the blade is already in. I waited until the speeches. The father of the groom spoke first, heartfelt, a little teary. The maid of honor followed, sweet rehearsed, full of inside jokes that had the tables laughing. Then it was my turn. She had given me strict instructions. Keep it short. Don't ramble. Don't tell one of your stories. But I took the microphone anyway, my hand steady, my voice calm. And in front of 200 people, I began to tell the story she never wanted anyone to hear. It started innocently enough, or at least it sounded that way. My voice was warm, my smile gentle, the way you speak when you want the audience leaning in. I remember when she was 7, I began letting the murmur of the room fade. We were at the school's spring talent show. She had insisted on singing a solo, a very big deal for such a small girl, and that morning, she woke up with her voice almost gone. Guests chuckled softly, a few parents nodding knowingly. My daughter's smile was tight, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She was in tears. I continued, certain she couldn't go on stage. But I told her, and I remember my exact words, the only way you embarrass yourself is by not trying. I promised her I'd sit in the front row and clap so hard she'd forget she was scared. I let the pause linger, drawing them closer, so she went up there. And halfway through the song, she froze, forgot the words, stood there under the lights looking at me with those same eyes I see now. I glanced at her deliberately just for a fraction of a second, and the shift in the air was almost tangible. She didn't know what to do, so I started singing with her. Right there in the audience, off-key, loud enough for the whole auditorium to hear. And people laughed, oh, they laughed. But then they started singing too, and by the end she was smiling again. You could feel it, couldn't you? That creeping tension in the room, the guests wondering if this was just a sweet memory or something more. Because you know that every story has teeth hidden somewhere. I thought I was teaching her courage, I said softly. I thought she'd remember that love doesn't care if you look foolish in front of strangers, that sometimes to protect someone you have to be willing to take the laughter for them. The room was silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. My daughter's knuckles were white around her champagne glass. But life is funny, I continued, tilting my head. Sometimes the people we protect grow up and decide they don't want to be reminded of the times we saved them. They call it embarrassing. They forget that those moments were the reason they could stand here today looking so perfect. A ripple went through the guests. Not laughter now, but something sharper. The kind of silence where people exchange glances, quietly taking sides. And you know the thing about truth. Once you drop it into a room, it doesn't matter how hard someone smiles, everyone feels the fracture. I looked at her then directly. I'm so proud of you. I said, my tone honeyed my eyes unblinking. And I truly hope, you'll always have someone who will risk looking like a fool just to keep you from falling apart. There was applause scattered at first, then building, but it wasn't the warm, unanimous cheer she'd been bathing in all night. It was fractured, hesitant, like people weren't sure what they were clapping for anymore. She hugged me when I handed the microphone back, her smile frozen for the cameras. But her whisper was cold enough to burn. What was that? Oh, nothing, I murmured against her cheek. Just a little story. That's the thing, isn't it? Some people think humiliation comes from volume, from shouting, from scandal. But the deepest kind is quiet, precise. You don't strip them bare, you let them feel the threads unravel right there in the middle of their perfect picture. The rest of the night, her laughter was a little too loud, her touches on her new husband's arm a little too forced. Because no matter how much she tried, the seed was planted in 200 minds. Maybe the golden girl hadn't always shone on her own. And seeds, well, they grow, don't they, even in the dark? I didn't need to do more that night. I'd already turned the mirror toward her, and she'd seen something she couldn't quite unsee. But that was only the beginning. Because when you spend years being made small, you learn that one well-timed truth can be far more dangerous than 100 insults. And I wasn't finished yet. After the speech, people started peeling away from her orbit like petals loosening in a wind they couldn't quite name. You noticed it too, didn't you? How a room shifts when an image is scratched. It's subtle at first, a missed laugh, a delayed compliment, a question that lands heavier than it should. By dessert, even the waiters took longer to refill her glass, as if the shine had dulled, and they weren't sure who they were serving anymore. She kept smiling, that brittle, camera-ready smile. The groom leaned in, whispered in her ear, a worried crease forming between his brows. He had the gentle kindness of someone who hadn't learned yet how to parse the difference between performance and peace. His mother, thought the shadow wife in pearls and a posture that announced lineage, watched me with the serene interest of a woman appraising an unexpected variable. You know that look. It isn't curiosity. It's calculation dressed in silk. I made my rounds, thanked the band, complimented the flowers, slid through conversations with the practiced ease of a woman who has spent years being forgettable on command. Guests stopped me with little comments that weren't really comments. Beautiful toast. So moving. You must be very proud. Their eyes asked the questions they were too civilized to voice. Is she ungrateful? Is there a story we don't know? You hate that, don't you? Being reduced to a whisper in someone else's mouth. But sometimes the whisper is an ally. Sometimes it enters rooms you cannot. By midnight, she was glass fragile, and I knew it. I saw it in the way her fingers trembled when she fixed her veil, the way she avoided mirrors, the way her laughter kept overshooting and crashing on the floor. She approached me near the exit where the winter air rolled in cold and honest. "Why would you do that?" she asked, voice tight. "You embarrassed me on my wedding night." "I told the truth," I said quietly. "You told your truth," she corrected. "You always make yourself the hero." There it was, the Golden Daughter's creed. Do you hear the projection in that? How the ones who hoard praise accuse you of stealing it. I wanted to tell her that heroes don't buy the dress after midnight because the bridal shop refused to hold it without a deposit. Heroes don't take out a second job so their kids can take dance and debate and the right extracurriculars. Heroes don't make a habit of swallowing humiliation until their throats remember the taste. But heroes also don't explain themselves to children who've mistaken politeness for loyalty. "I'm going home," I said. "Enjoy your night." By dawn, the messages began. "The maid of honor, are you okay?" That was intense, a bridesmaid I'd barely met. "Your story made me cry. My sister, you did what you had to do." And then hers. 5 words, no punctuation. "We need to talk. Now." You know the sick heat that rises when your phone lights up with a demand from someone who believes you owe them everything. You felt that clench. You breathe through it. You remember your age, your spine, the quiet mother who doesn't flinch anymore. I waited until afternoon. When I called, she didn't say hello. You ruined the vibe, she hissed. People are texting me weird questions. They think I don't know, ungrateful. Are you? I asked. Silence, that small, furious kind. Then God, you are impossible. When someone says you're impossible, what they often mean is that you've become inconvenient to their version of events. Keep that in your pocket. It will save you years. Over the next week, the narrative began to curdle. Her new mother-in-law arranged a family brunch ostensibly to welcome me properly. The invitation arrived on heavy stationery that smelled faintly of lavender and gatekeeping. I went. Of course I went. You don't decline the theater when you've learned where the trapdoors are. The table gleamed with ancestral silver. The women spoke in soft blades. Your toast caused quite a stir, the pearls said, buttering a roll with surgical grace. We encourage discretion in our family. She smiled like a confession booth, but I'm sure your heart was in the right place. And isn't that the line used to domesticate women like me? The quiet mother is supposed to not apologize, be rehabilitated into the program, but I had brought something with me, not a prop, not a weapon. A fact. My heart, I said, has been paying for things your son thinks fell from trees. The groom's head jerked up. My daughter's fork stopped midair. The venue deposit, I continued. The florist when the credit card declined. The tuxedo alterations. The makeup trial you canceled twice and still got charged for. I didn't say anything because I didn't want her to feel small. I wanted her to feel I glanced at my daughter enough. You could feel the temperature change. Money has a way of dragging truth into daylight. You can call that crass if you like, but bills are biographies, and biographies don't lie. She told us she had it under control, Pearls murmured. The words were gentle. The judgment wasn't. She looked at her son. Did you know? He didn't. The realization passed through his face like a shadow crossing a lake. He looked at my daughter the way people look at paintings when they finally see the brushstrokes. I didn't enjoy it. Don't make me into a villain for telling you I felt nothing. Sometimes nothing is what you feel when you've outrun pleading. It's the absence that follows a storm, the clean emptiness where a new structure can be built. After brunch, my daughter cornered me in the powder room where the mirrors were honest and the soap cost more than my winter coat. You're trying to make me look bad, she whispered. No, I said, I'm trying to make you look. She stared at me, then away, then back, that flicker of the little girl searching the crowd for the mother who would sing along when she forgot the words. And here is the unbearable thing: the golden daughter is not born cruel. She is born hungry. The danger comes when nobody teaches her how to feed herself without swallowing other people whole. If you have a daughter like that, you know the ache. You know how easily love blurs with rescue, how rescue turns into choreography, how choreography becomes control, and how control erases the very person you once vowed to protect. I left before the coffee. In the car, I sat with my hands on the wheel and my heart startlingly quiet. The plan was forming precise as a needle, no shouting, no scenes, no ruin. Just a mirror so clear she wouldn't be able to blink. Because sometimes the kindest mercy is the consequence no one else will deliver. 2 weeks passed before I saw her again. Not a word, not a call, just the occasional flicker of her on social media smiling in ways I recognized as performance. Honeymoon photos drenched in curated sunsets, champagne flutes, his arm draped over her shoulder, in that way men do when they think they've married their best decision. You could almost believe it if you didn't know the tension under her skin. Then came the charity gala. Black tie, glass chandeliers, the kind of room where power hums low under the music. I wasn't invited, not directly, but my sister was on the committee and she insisted I join her. They'll be there, she said, and something in her tone suggested this wasn't a suggestion. When I walked in, the air shifted just slightly. She was across the room, glittering in navy satin, laughing a little too brightly at something the chairwoman had said. I saw her notice me. That smile faltered for less than a heartbeat before she replaced it with a mask of cordial surprise. You know that look like you've arrived at a party you weren't meant to survive. But here's the thing about high rooms like that: they're built on stories. The right story at the right time can unravel years of careful image. And I knew exactly whose story the right ears hadn't heard yet. I let the evening flow speeches a silent auction polite applause. I stayed quiet, a shadow in the corner, until the chairman himself approached. You're the bride's mother, he said warmly. Lovely wedding, and such a generous young woman. She mentioned she's been funding local arts programs since college. Oh, I said, as if the memory were just dawning. Well, technically, that funding came from a small account I set aside. She wanted to be the face of it, so I let her. Thought it might help her confidence back then. I didn't say it with malice. I said it like you'd say the weather had been colder than expected, and that my dear is what makes it sink deeper, the absence of obvious venom. The chairman's brows lifted just slightly before he nodded polite and moved on. But you and I both know where that would go. These rooms run on polite, and polite is a courier. She found me not 20 minutes later. Why would you say that she hissed her breath hot against my ear? Because it's true, I replied, and truth doesn't die just because it's inconvenient. She pulled back, eyes sharp. You're jealous. There it was again, the easy accusation. Jealousy is the label they stick on any woman who refuses to worship at their altar. I could have told her jealousy was for things I didn't already know how to earn, but instead I just smiled. You should sit with that thought, I said. Ask yourself why it feels safer than gratitude. I left before dessert. In my absence, she would stew, and the room would breathe the story in like expensive perfume, faint, lingering, impossible to wash off. And this wasn't cruelty, not to me. This was exposure, because you can't heal a lie while everyone around you is applauding it. Over the following month, little cracks began to show in her perfect facade. Her new husband started calling me directly about bills he thought were already paid. She stopped tagging me in posts. The photos became fewer, the captions shorter. Once, she even showed up at my door, unannounced, arms crossed like a barrier she was holding up with sheer willpower. You're making people question me, she said. It's not fair. Fair, I repeated. Do you remember what you said at your bridal shower in front of everyone? Her gaze flickered, the memory catching her like a thorn. That was different. No, I said softly, that was the start. You could see the war happening inside her. One part still the little girl who wanted someone to clap for her no matter how off-key she sang. The other part the grown woman who thought she could rewrite the past by erasing the witness. And here's the secret they don't tell you about reclaiming your power. You don't have to win the argument. You just have to stop participating in the performance. I didn't shout, I didn't plead, I simply stood there quiet and immovable until she realized she couldn't make me bend. She left without another word, and I knew then that the mirror I'd been holding up was doing its work. Because the most uncomfortable truths aren't the ones screamed at you. They're the ones you see reflected in your own eyes when no one else is around. The final move was still ahead, and it would be the kind of ending you don't write for revenge but for release. It came sooner than I expected, the final move, not because I rushed it, but because she brought it to my doorstep herself. A month after that last confrontation, I received an invitation. Thick ivory cardstock embossed in gold, smelling faintly of roses and ambition. It was for an anniversary dinner, their 6-month anniversary. You read that right. Who celebrates 6 months like it's a milestone. People who need witnesses to their stability, people who sense the narrative slipping. The event was set at an upscale restaurant downtown, all velvet booths and low lighting designed to flatter the faces of the wealthy. 2 long tables had been arranged end to end, set for 20 guests, mostly his family, a smattering of friends, and me seated strategically across from her so we'd be forced to meet each other's eyes. The air was thick with performance. She was radiant, of course, a sapphire silk dress, her hair sculpted to perfection. Her laugh rang across the table like champagne poured too quickly. But if you've ever been in the presence of someone working this hard to look unbothered, you know it's exhausting just to watch. When it was time for the toasts, her husband stood first. He thanked everyone for coming, spoke warmly about their incredible first half year together, and ended with a clink of his glass in her direction. She gave him a kiss for the crowd then, and this is where the script turned. She stood. I just want to thank my husband, she began, and all of you for supporting us as we build our life together, and her eyes found me, especially my mother. Even though we don't always see eye to eye, she taught me strength. You felt that, didn't you, that subtle framing? It was a compliment with splinters wrapped in a bow for public consumption. The guests turned to me smiling like I should be grateful. I rose slowly, not for revenge, not to humiliate, but because it was time to take the story back. Thank you, I began, my voice steady. It's true we don't always see eye to eye, but raising her taught me something too. I paused, letting the room lean in. It taught me that love without truth is just decoration. A flicker passed over her face, a tiny involuntary crack in the mask. I've made mistakes, I continued. I protected her when I should have let her stumble. I covered debts, filled gaps, made sure no one saw the moments when she wasn't as polished as she appears tonight. And for a long time I thought that was my role as a mother, to shield her from the eyes of the world. A few guests shifted in their seats. His mother, the Pearls, tilted her head slightly the way a predator listens for weakness. But the truth, I said, is that every shield eventually becomes a cage, and the hardest thing a parent can do is step back and let the world see their child as they truly are, flaws, cracks, and all, because that's the only way they'll ever grow strong enough to carry themselves. You could feel the weight in the silence. The room wasn't sure if this was a blessing or a reckoning. Maybe it was both. I turned to her, holding her gaze without malice. So here's my gift to you from this night forward. I won't protect you from the truth, not mine, not anyone's. I hope you use it well. I sat down. No applause this time, just that thick, humming quiet where people recalibrate their perceptions. Dinner resumed, but the energy had shifted. Conversations were softer, glances sharper. She didn't look at me again, not once. When dessert arrived, she excused herself, claiming she felt unwell. I watched her go the sapphire dress disappearing into the shadowed hallway. You might think I should have felt triumphant, but all I felt was stillness. Because this wasn't about winning anymore. It was about putting down a burden I had carried for decades, the burden of being the constant, the fixer, the invisible scaffolding holding up someone else's image. When I left that night, I didn't say goodbye. I didn't need to. She would remember every word, replay them, resent them, maybe even one day understand them, but that was hers to carry now. I drove home through quiet streets, the city lights flickering against the windshield. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel the urge to explain myself to anyone, least of all her. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.